Welcome to Shop Talk Live, Fine Woodworking Magazine's bi-weekly podcast. I'm your host and Fine Woodworking editor, Tom McKenna, and with me are regulars, Executive Art Director Mike Pekovich.
Howdy, gentlemen.
And Special Projects Editor Matthew Kenny.
Hello, everyone.
As usual, before we get started, I need to take care of some housekeeping. Don't forget to check our website to keep up with our exciting tool giveaway for Fine Woodworking's 40th anniversary. As I've mentioned in previous podcasts, we have 40 great tool prizes, but they change regularly and you have to enter for each one. The current prize is a set of 3 joinery saws from Lee Valley. To win the saws, you must enter by Monday, February 29th, and to enter, go to finewoodworking.com/40sweeps. That's the number 40, finewoodworking.com/40sweeps. Finally, you can keep up with Fine Woodworking on Instagram and on Facebook, and you can look for Matt, Mike, and me on Instagram as well. And our web producer, Ben Strano, is on there too. So it's all good.
Can I ask a question real quick about the prize?
Sure.
Those are the Veritas saws.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I wanted to know.
So 3 joinery saws. What is that? Dovetail, tenon, and carcass. And
Yep.
There you go.
That's all you need.
what about the bracket foot saw
Well,
That's a custom one.
That's a custom.
and the cabriolet saw?
That cuts on the pull stroke, I think.
Cuts on the pull stroke.
Hey, I thought it might be a fun thing to start our podcast today by talking about what's going on in our own home shops. I know we're all kind of posting stuff on Instagram, and I figure maybe we can let our podcast audience know about what we're doing as well. Do you want to roll with this, Mike?
Yeah, that's cool, because I was just playing hooky this morning, taking some pictures of stuff in my house of projects I just finished up. One was a little wall cabinet, which is actually going to be an upcoming issue of Fine Woodworking. I was trying to get some options for the cover. And then the second thing I was shooting, just because I had everything set up, was a little sort of funky little drop front desk that I just finished up that incorporates kind of a lot of techniques I've been working on, sticky outy dovetails, little kumiko, but also some funky things like splayed tapered turn legs and sort of a, I don't know, it's a thing. And actually it's probably one of the first projects that I built since I started posting on Instagram. So if you want to head on over to Pekovich Woodworks on Instagram, you could see the whole building of the process, everything from the design to just cutting joints and putting things together.
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that piece.
Thanks.
A lot. It's very different from anything you've done too, with the turn legs, at least from what I've seen in your repertoire. So it's really cool. I like the Kumiko center panel. Very interesting.
Thanks.
Well, I have, of course, been making boxes. Oh, have I been making boxes?
Hey, you signed up for it.
So since the last time we've been here, I've completed 2 boxes, and I'm still working on a 3rd box. And like as with Mike, all of my stuff, I usually put something on Instagram every day. And so this box is already up on my my website and blog. It's a little sugar or salt bowl, and it's turned from marble wood, and the lid is walnut. And actually, this will come up today later in the podcast when we talk about something. So, and the inside's painted. I like that.
Very, very cool.
Yeah. And then I just finished up last night the box for this week, which is another bandsawn box. It's made from cherry, which has some really nice color, and it has milk paint too.
Milk paint.
Yeah.
Sensing a theme.
I like milk paint.
Very cool.
And I've also got, a big box. A big thing that I'm working on right now is a tea box, which I've been working on, but it has some cool new stuff for me. One thing it has is not complicated kumiko, but there is some kumiko on it. And it has it's a sort of a new style of casework that I've been exploring on it as well. So I hope to have that done within a couple of weeks.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really cool piece. I like that.
Yeah. In my since Mike gave his Instagram out, I'm going to give mine out.
Oh, here we go.
It's kenny.matt. See, mine's more humble. It's just my name. But you have to spell my last name. It's amazing how people misspell my last name. It's Kenney.
And you have a website too,
I
right?
do have a website, but that's mekwoodworks.com.
Oh, very different.
Weren't you making some bluebird houses as well or something?
Oh, yeah, but that's not for me.
No.
I made 70 bluebird houses for myself. No.
For someone's Eagle Scout project, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, my son's a Cub Scout, and there's a Cub Scout in his den who has an older brother who's going for Eagle Scout, and they asked if I would help this young man cut up and make the parts for 16 bluebird houses, which seems to be the eternal Cub Scout, Boy Scout project.
Yes.
Because holy
Yes.
cow, it's like how many bluebirds are in Connecticut? There's like, they each have like 4 houses.
That and picnic benches.
And picnic benches.
It's funny what happens once word gets out that you're a woodworker, especially in Scouts. I wound up milling up a bunch of wood for toolboxes, tool totes that the Scouts were making. So I spent the whole weekend.
I did that
ripping
for my son's den last year. We all did toolboxes, and so this kid came over on Monday morning, which was a holiday for us. It was like 32 degrees in my shop because it was that super cold snap, and he and his dad were there, and so I did some explaining and let him use the machinery some, but I also I was like, you could push a board this fast through the table saw, and he would do it and be like 4 times slower. So I was like, okay, you did too. Let me do the rest so that we get done before midnight. No, but he's a really nice kid, and we got all the parts done for 16 birdhouses. So it was fun. It was cool, and I had a lot of scrap left to burn in my wood stove.
There you go.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Well, I've been doing something. I've never built a cabinet on stand before, so that's what I've been working on, building the base, and it's really my first time. I've got legs that are tapered on 2 sides and a lower stretcher assembly that has angled shoulders. So that was my big challenge in conquering that. It was really my first time doing that kind of a joint. Usually I'm pretty wimpy, and I'd like to go straight on in with the joinery.
Right.
So that's what I've been working on. I'm at a point now where I'm dialing in, the aprons, doing the final work on the aprons, and then hopefully once that's glued up, I'll be able to do a mock-up, like a cardboard mock-up. I haven't fully realized what I want to do up top yet. I kind of know, like in my head, but I haven't done any kind of dimensional thing. I figure I'll do what a lot of us have been doing lately is making a little cardboard prototype and seeing, the scale, and then going back to, from that to, a rough sketch and building from that. Unfortunately, I've had to take a break because I've decided to remodel my bathroom. So my woodworking will be cut a little bit in the next 3 weeks while I finish up that job, but it's all fun.
I'm kind of curious when you said you had to do angled shoulders and an angled tenon. I was curious later to see how you did that, because I did something similar, and I wonder how you did it compared to how I did it.
Well, we can talk about it now. What I did is I used our shop mortiser. I cut the mortises before I tapered the legs. Yeah. And then I had to deepen the mortise a little bit. And then I had a limited amount of really sweet walnut, and I didn't want to blow it experimenting on something I'd never done before. So I had a bunch of poplar that I was just kind of experimenting in to dial in my technique of getting the shoulders. And it was pretty much just, I did it all by hand. Yeah. Whittling away. And I basically created a template of a stretcher that fit the mortises and got the shoulders perfect. And I used that as a model.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, when I had to do that, I stole something from Mike, an idea from Mike, the wedge.
Oh, yeah.
And I wrote a blog about it on finewoodworking.com.
The wedge.
The wedge, and I used, because I made this wedge that matched the angle of the shoulder, basically, or the angle of the leg, what have you. And then I was able to use that one wedge to mortise the leg. And at almost every stage of, when I cut the shoulders, I used it there. And it made it so I didn't have to adjust any angles on gauges or anything like that. I just used this wedge to always reference my work pieces against, and everything came out perfect without any experimentation or any having to think about it at all.
Right.
No, I did a lot of thinking, but it worked. I was really just very careful, and just making that template, helped me a lot. But I wish I read your blog before I.
Well, I'll say this. I should say this because it's not that it didn't involve any thinking at all. It's just that all the thinking was done before all of the working.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So yeah, I should say that.
I like automatic things.
Automatic
You
is
do
awesome.
one thing, and you sort of plug that into every problem, and it's done.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, I think some people might balk and say, "Well, there's no skill involved there," and that's baloney. It's just that it's a different type of skill. It's the skill to figure out a solution that's comprehensive and results in awesomeness.
Yes, I try to learn as many skills as I can, and then tax my knowledge of skills as little as possible. It's the middle path.
It's the righteous path. All right, why don't we move on to some reader questions? The first one comes from Doug Calvert, who writes, I'm a 62-year-old woodworker who rediscovered woodworking about 12 years ago. You often tell new woodworkers to wait and decide what kind of work they want to do before buying any tools. How on earth do you do that? How did each of you decide what kind of woodworking you wanted to do, and what gives you the most joy building, and why? Well, these are deep thoughts, man.
Well, I mean, I think in general, you can answer big questions pretty easily. Like, do you want to make boats or chairs or spoons or furniture for your house?
Or carved garden gnomes.
So, I mean, I would say, chances are you probably have a pretty good idea of the general category, and that's going to point to, a basic setup of tools.
Sure.
But I am a firm believer in, every project, I try to incorporate a new technique, and I try to find an excuse to buy a new tool. So it's sort of organically, as you think of projects you want to build, what tools do you need to make it?
Yeah.
And can you get by with what you have, or is there a good excuse to get something if you're itching to get another tool?
But I don't know. I certainly agree with that advice that what you make will determine to a large extent the tools that you need, but there is a basic set of tools that every woodworker could get and use. Now, obviously, if you decide early on that for philosophical reasons or lifestyle reasons or whatever, all you want to do is work hand tools. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then there's a basic set of hand tools you need, right? To mill lumber, to cut it to dimension, etc. And if you decide, well, I'm okay using power tools, then there's a basic set of power tools that you need. And I don't think that really changes depending on what you make.
Right.
I do make furniture, but I make a lot of boxes too. You make mostly furniture.
Yep. But mostly solid wood, not a lot of sheet goods or built-ins or cabinetry.
Yeah,
so.
But you and I pretty much have the same tools.
Yeah.
I have some things that you don't have. Have a vacuum press,
right?
Because I do that kind of stuff. But we pretty much have the same tools. And also, but I also think that you'll probably know what you want to make pretty quickly. You know what the first thing I ever made was?
No.
A box. It was a garden box for my wife, right? You know what the second thing I ever made was?
A box?
A box. The third thing I ever made was a box. I started making boxes very early.
Well, that's funny. My first, I would say, in college, my first real furniture making project in college when I got into it was a arts and crafts-ish, greenish contemporary coffee table where all the joints stuck out.
Boom, there you go.
What does that figure?
That's Mike Pekovich.
Well, this speaks ill of me because I have my first ever woodworking project, and it's in my office in a cabinet, and it's a little book holder made out of pine, and it has my name. I think 9th grade, room 9B or whatever.
That's not the same thing.
No, that
though.
doesn't count.
That is,
But it's funny how I think my entry into woodworking was sort of just through high school. I always liked to make things. Well, it started off by me disassembling things. When I was younger, I used to take apart radios and bicycles, and then my dad would try to put them together and then usually buy me a new radio or say, you're done. But I used to go to Radio Shack and buy, kits. And so I've always enjoyed building things. And then when I discovered the wood shop in 9th grade, I mean, I still the smell of that wood shop, when you walk into any of our authors' shops, it's the same. It's that there's just that feeling of wood.
marijuana and bourbon. That's what they all smell like.
What office have you been to? but it's just, to me, I moved away from it, came back after I bought a house and discovered that, doing home repairs kind of automatically led to getting back to making furniture. And usually I just make things for my home and for, friends as gifts. And that's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah.
But we've answered this question, I think, before in the past, maybe not exactly this phrasing of it. But first, most people listening to the podcast are not professional furniture makers, and they're making furniture for enjoyment, and they're making things for their house. So you probably are going to be making furniture. And so, you instead of thinking about individual tools, think about the tasks that you have to do to make things. If you're really going to be getting into this, you're going to need to mill lumber. So there's a set of tools there that you need to mill lumber, whether it's hand tools only or a mix of power tools and hand tools, whatever. There's a basic set of tools you need there.
Right.
You got to cut joinery. So, what tools am I going to use to cut joinery? And that, again, the answer depends on, if you're going to go hand tools, you need back saws. If you're going to go power tools, you could probably get a table saw and a router and cut pretty much every joint you need. So it's probably, the more I think about this, the more I think it's maybe not as a mystifying question as I used to think, and maybe a lot of people think about what tools you need. I don't know.
Yeah, but I do think there's, the notion of the perfect shop doesn't exist because it really depends on what you're doing in there.
Yeah. And once you get further in past the basic set and you're really down the rabbit hole of making things, that's when you start to think, okay, I need these specialized tools.
Yeah.
And that's not at the beginning.
Right.
Yeah. Like I've started doing more inlay, and now I'm thinking, well, I need more carving gouges and things. Inlay tools is kind of what I'm looking for. I've got most of the other tools I need to do what I need, but now I'm in that, hey, I want to do this. This is my next step, and so start looking for specialty items.
Yeah. And the other thing to do is to find like a place to take classes nearby, or maybe a communal shop, and start making things there and get your feet wet, and then start buying tools.
Right.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to question number 2. This is from Chris Haslam. And Chris says, I'm a beginning woodworker. Recently, I finished milling some black acacia boards with the jointer and planer and noticed some tear out. I decided to skip the plane and use a card scraper to clean up the boards, but the scraper seemed to be shredding the fibers in that area. I switched to a hand plane, which gave me better results. Can you explain what's happening? The scraper was taking nice shavings on other areas of the board. I think he just got dulled, is my thought, but Mike,
I don't know.
The
cool thing about scrapers is if they're dull, they tend to just sort of take dust instead of shavings. They tend to not cut, but not every type of wood is equally suited for scraping. For instance, I would never scrape softer woods like pine or a softer hardwood like butternut or even poplar, because those will tend to tear as opposed to really, finish nice smoothly. So, it's probably maybe the type of wood you're using. Maybe you're hitting some weird reversing grain, but the bottom line there is the more woods that you work with and you get to know, you start to understand their working properties, and you start to anticipate how they're going to react to different tools. And it sounds like you just found out that black acacia is not necessarily
scraper friendly. Right?
Scraper friendly. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Black acacia, by the way, grows all over the world.
Yes.
But does best in Tasmania.
Huh.
And so other names for it are Tasmanian terror wood.
Okay.
Not really, but but that's where it does best in Tasmania.
Huh. And Ben was saying something about the Jenga scale.
The Jingo scale.
Jingo scale. What is that?
The Jinka scale.
Basically, it's a scale of wood hardness, Ben? Okay.
Yeah.
Ben's over in the corner with his headphones on off camera. Basically, he was saying that it's a pretty hard wood, so that sort of ruled out my first suspicion is maybe this was sort of a soft, stringy wood. Harder woods tend to scrape a little better, but this might be an exception.
Well, there are hardwoods like a nice rowy type of African mahogany is not going to scrape very well, will it? Because it has so much reversing grain, and it could be I could see that being problematic.
Yeah, I mean, you tend to get sort of like every other stripe is kind of gray, a little bit fuzzy. I wouldn't say it doesn't really shred, but you don't get if you scrape something like that with rowy wood reversing grain, you always have to sand.
Yeah.
Definitely afterwards.
I mean, other woods that it might be comparable to, I don't remember what Ben said, where it was on the Janka scale. I think he said it was near yellow pine. Ash. Yeah. Which is really hard. But it might still be kind of fibrous, like something like elm, like red elm, or what's the other wood you like to use so much that's brown, that's kind of soft?
Butternut?
Butternut.
Yeah, butternut's way too soft. I wouldn't scrape that. But even white oak, where I do scrape white oak fairly regularly, but even when you do, it tends to really lift up the grain. Mm-hmm. And even after you sand it down, it's sort of like when you put the first wash coat of shellac on it or first coat of finish, all those fibers stick straight up and you really have to sand those down. Yeah. So oak is probably one of those ones that while I do scrape it a lot, it doesn't leave that really nice smooth surface other woods do.
It could be splintery, like Douglas fir is splintery, or like what you're saying, white oak is a little splintery. So it could, all those things.
Yep. Got to adapt.
By the way, I've spoken for approximately half the time so far.
Well, that's about average. Let's get back to talk more. It's time for our all-time favorite tool of all time for this week. Do you want to start us off, Mr. Matt?
Yeah.
All right. So actually, I forgot to bring it in with me, but so when I was turning this little box, by the way,
vessel bowl,
this box,
lidded bowl,
and so I turned the bowl first, and I just I did that by
on a lathe.
On a lathe, yes, yes. But
was it a treadle lathe?
I can't remember. I turned the outside first, left a tenon, turned it around, turned the inside, and then sort of parted it off, and then just took a chisel and cleaned up the rest of the tenon on the bottom. Yep. But the top, what I wanted to do was to have the top scooped out a little bit underneath to sort of match the curve of the top, but also to make it lighter and more delicate. Yeah. So similar fashion, I started out with a blank, turned it round, and turned a tenon on it, which would have been the bottom. Put that into my scroll chuck, and then turned the top.
Okay.
And got the shape where I wanted it. Drilled the hole for the little pull, and then there's no tenon left there, so I can't turn it around and just put it in the chuck and finish that off.
Right.
So after I messed up the first one, doing something that I knew was not the right way to do it, I made a jam chuck.
Okay. Not
a lamb chop, but a jam chuck. And a jam chuck is, which turners will know right off the bat what a jam chuck is. But so I took a piece of ash and like a 3-inch thick piece of ash, and turned it round, turned a tenon on it, put that tenon in my scroll chuck.
Okay.
Cleaned up the face, and then turned a slight little concave recess into the face of that piece of ash.
Yeah.
And that matched more or less the curve on the top of the lid.
Okay.
And so then I could put the lid in that indent.
Right.
Bring up my center from my tailstock, and I put that center in the tenon that was still there.
And there was that center already marked?
There was already marked from when I turned the whole thing around initially.
Cool.
So I put that in there, and so tighten that down, and it becomes the pressure of the tailstock pushing it against this jam chuck.
Okay.
That keeps everything still. And so then I was just able to because this is turned like a bowl, not like a spindle, just to get a gouge and start to hollow out the underside of the lid. And then as you get down closer, you can just turn that tenon away, slowly turn that tenon away, and then it is done. And then just a little bit of chisel work, or with a gouge would be better, but I don't own any gouges, and just kind of clean that up and then sanded it. And I got a nice hollowed out, not as good as I would have liked it, but it was the first time I ever done that.
Awesome.
So
very nice.
Wafer thin.
It is.
It is very thin and very light. So a jam chuck is my favorite tool of all time.
Isn't that a brand of wireless speaker too?
Jam chuck?
Yeah.
Those are my headphones.
I got some jam chucks.
Yeah.
No. So that's mine, anyways.
Nice.
How about you, Mike?
What are we doing? Tool?
Tool.
Okay, because that sounded awfully like a technique.
Yeah, that was a
I was
technique.
waiting for the
That was a technique. Weren't we doing techniques?
all-time favorite tool of all time for this week.
Oh. Well, let me give you my tool then, because my tool's related.
No, save it for the technique.
Yeah.
All right, I'll save it for the technique.
No, we'll save tools later. Let's just do techniques right now.
Yeah,
Okay.
all right, that's
All
cool.
right, I have a technique. So I was talking about this little drop front desk I just finished up. And it's one of these things where you think I would have thought about how to latch the drop front of the desk at some point in the building prior to actually getting to the point of doing it. And I waited to the last minute, was trying to think of like fancy bullet catches and little pins and pegs and homemade, shop-made things. And I finally said, no, I'm just going to do a nice little half mortise lock. So, which I've done before. However, this door was like done. And there was like a lot of investment in making it the door and the kumiko and in installing these hand-forged strap hinges and everything. So it's like, I don't want to mess this up. So, but it was just one little lock mortise. And I thought, well, actually a while back I did an article on making a set of routing jigs to install half mortise locks. And one of the arguments I made was that normally it's like a half-day process to do it just right. And even then it's kind of fiddly, but you can make these jigs. And the time it takes to make these jigs and install a half mortise lock, it's much faster and it's really quick and reliable. Well, I wrote the article, but in thinking back to the article, I thought
It's all
wrong.
It's all a bunch of BS.
that's like way too much work. I'm not going to do this. That's where my head was at there. Now I'm just going to install this half mortise lock by hand. And the more I thought about it, the more I said, nah, I'm going to read that article again. And I did. And so I used this article and I made a set of 3 jigs really, really fast. I built them right around the lock mortise itself. It took me maybe 15, 20 minutes at the outside to make these 3 jigs. One jig is for drilling the holes for the little keyhole. And then a second jig is used to route a deep mortise for the body of the lock. And then a third jig is used to route that shallow mortise for the plate and the selvage, which is the plate on the edge of the lock. And so I made the jigs, and then I thought, well, okay, are they really going to work? So so I used a test piece, and I went through the whole process, and the half mortise lock, it fit perfectly. It's like, wow, this actually works pretty well. So then I did it on the real drop front lid for the desk, and it turned out well. So there you have it.
I wish you had just done it on the lid for the desk to begin with, and not even. Why'd you even do a test cut, Mike? Come on, live dangerously.
Dive right in.
Come on.
I should have actually. Well, yeah.
You know what's
No.
missing from the article and the 3 jigs, right?
Yes.
Is that you need to have a 4th jig, which you actually use first, which is the jig the guy uses to fill in the hole that he drilled wrong when he was trying to do it by hand. And then he starts with the 3 jigs that you made.
Well, don't you need to have a jig to hold all the jigs?
That's right.
So that's a favorite technique. It's like, yeah, no, that actually worked, and I was sort of glad to have those, and it got me out of a jam. And this is what I did because it was a different size lock set than the size lock sets that I normally use. Otherwise, I would have used the jigs that I had for the big guys. When I bought the lock set, I bought 2 of them.
So that you'll have to get more use out of the jigs.
So you have to make another one.
Now, if I ever have to install a small lock set, not only do I have the lock set on hand, I have the set of jigs.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what I need to do is write down on these jigs the model number and brand of the lock set that they go for.
Yeah. And
There you go.
contrary
Very
to what Mike's story suggests about the nature of our magazine, we do, in fact, vet articles before we run them. And 2, we do require that the author has a good understanding of what they're doing. You just have forgotten since
been a long
since
time.
you did
Yeah,
it.
but
been a long time.
sometimes it's like you go to New York, like I'll drive, and then the next time it's like that's too much hassle. I'll take the train. Then you take the train and says, no, that sucks. I'm going to drive next time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that with like, jigging up for a really, predictable result, or just
Winging
bust
it.
out the hand tools and figure it out.
Yeah.
I had a similar experience recently. I had to put in some small hinges on a door for the big tee box I'm making, and I contemplated just doing them by hand. And then I was like, no, I'm just going to make a quick jig that has both mortises in it so I can route both at the same time. And anyways.
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, my technique is it's come from kind of where I'm working now and where I'm at is I don't do really detailed sketches of my pieces. The only thing I really will draw out in detail is our joinery details. And on this base that I'm building, I made the aprons really, really fat. I saw what Tim Coleman does and how he's a master of transitions, on aprons and how they die into the legs. Right. And so I was sort of following his lead, and I was looking to dial in the reveal. And so what I did is I drew a line on one apron and bandsaw it to that line. The apron was still pretty fat. And then I was just hand planing down to by eye to get the reveal that I want. And it kept putting the apron back together. Right. But one of the things I discovered is that I kept having to resharpen my number 4 and, to really get that nice surface. And so what I did is I decided, well, I've got a number 4.5. Why don't I just employ both planes? And so I grabbed my number 4.5 and used that for the rough, material removal, and used the number 4 for the final sweet passes. And it really worked out well. And what I liked about it was in my method is it's tedious. I wouldn't recommend it for a pro or anyone who's trying to make money because it's very time consuming, but just the time and the care and the peace and quiet that I was going through, just working out the details by eye and putting it together and saying, oh, that's just where I want to be, and not working off a plan or a measurement. And I was describing my process to one of my woodworking friends who he's an engineer by trade, and so he's really hung up on the number. He says, well, what was the measurement? And I just kept saying, I don't know what it was.
About that much.
And I said, well, I had to go back and say, well, it was whatever. I went back and I measured it. It was some wacky number, like something 30 seconds of an inch. But it's really fun. I mean, that's what I really like about, as I integrate hand tools more into my work, is the idea that I don't need plans. I can trust my eye, and it's sort of a tool unto its own, and incorporating the 2 planes, it saved wear and tear. I didn't have to sharpen as often. Cool. And I'm pretty darn happy with the results. And so once I got the one apron down to the thickness I wanted, I just used that as kind of a rough template to follow for the others. So it was a nice afternoon.
Nice.
So your all-time favorite technique of all time for this week is buying 2 hand planes?
Yes.
Can we just boil it down to that?
Well, that was part of my tool. It was sort of tool oriented, but no, it's sort of the, I was thinking of using my jointer or a planer to
knock it down,
to thickness the aprons, but I thought, no, I'm going to mess it up. And it's better for me, I'd rather work slowly and more quietly and get it to where I want to be. And
so hand planing.
Hand planing, yeah.
There you go.
It's nice.
Yeah, it's good. It's good times. Good times.
All right. What's next, Matt?
We're going to another question. This one is from Billy Bob Thornton. He'd like to know if we'd make him some biscuits.
I thought he wanted some boxes. Anyway, let's move on to questions. Like Matt said, this one is from Ruben Villanueva, and he says, he asks, what type of finish do you recommend for a high traffic table? The table finish I have now gets white when hot items are placed on it, but is okay with cold and wet things on it.
Well,
I don't know what the.
First of all, don't put hot things on your table.
Don't put anything hot on your table.
That's what pot fingers are for. What are those things called?
Pot stickers?
Not pot stickers. You know, the like a cork thing that you put under your hot pot.
Yeah, hot plate.
No, that's
hot
not a
plate.
hot plate.
What is it?
I don't.
Come on,
Jeff?
Mr. Language.
Jeff.
Trivet.
Trivets, yes,
Nah,
a cork trivet or something.
Trivet Pursuit.
Trivet, I thought that was more like the doily.
No, a trivet's
on the end table.
like a metal thing.
Huh.
Could be wood.
But a cork trivet is nice or something like that. But anyways, listen to the guy's question.
But that's not the question.
What finish does it get? I wonder if it after it's hot, not hot, once it cools off, does it go back to clear again, or does it just stay white?
I don't know. Ruben didn't go into that.
What finish? You want to use something hard and durable. So you got to be looking at like a wipe-on varnish or a spray-on varnish or a brush-on varnish of some sort.
Or catalyzed lacquer
Catalyzed lacquer,
or catalyzed varnish. I mean, those are the commercial choices.
which you have to spray and
Yeah, and that's
they're
like
not good.
nasty.
I don't think Ruben wants to spray.
I made a table before I came to find woodworking, so it's excuse me, it's got to be like 9 years old, and it just had like I bought like straight up varnish and mixed it with mineral spirits to thin it out and wiped it on, and it's lasted 8 years,
I think
9 years.
Yeah, I think basically oil-based varnish, like a regular varnish or polyurethane varnish, same thing, is going to do probably the best job that we're capable of doing without spraying and getting into industrial finishes. And there, it's really the thickness of the film finish, I think, is directly related to the protection you're going to get on a really high-use area. So, I would... typically, I'll wipe on a finish to raise a grain, wet sand that down or sand it down smooth, probably brush on a couple coats to really build that up, level that down, then maybe wipe on a couple extra coats because it's a little bit easier to get a nice level, smooth finish by wiping on the subsequent coats. And that should be pretty good. If you're getting white rings from like wet glasses make white rings, that's because you've waxed the surface and it's really the wax interacting. But this sounds like something different. I have seen in the past where something hot will make the white ring, and I think it does tend to disappear. But yeah, I mean, just understand the finish you're putting on is not bomb-proof, so protect it from really hot surfaces. And if you get a thick enough coat, then that's definitely going to protect from moisture or anything like that.
But as a woodworker, really what he needs to do is refinish his tabletop, if that's what he wants to do, and then make some wooden trivets. And just don't put hot stuff
Don't
down
put hot stuff
on the table, directly on the table. I mean, I would recommend that you never do that, really hot stuff or wet,
No.
Sweating things and like cups and so forth.
Give your family coasters.
Yeah. Yeah, just put plastic over everything. And put ribbon candy out.
One thing a lot of people don't know about is certain cleaners will mess up your varnish finish and will soften it and like forever. And I actually, on our kitchen table where we eat at every single day, I had a brushed on Waterlox finish, and it was really bomb-proof, but I don't know, some mystery cleaner, I forget what it was, and it's a really common thing too. It just softened the finish, so every time on really humid days it'd be a little bit sticky, and I really hated that. So I finally was actually able to scrape off most of the finish because it's turned kind of gummy, and I had just maybe some remnants of fast-drying polyurethane for floors that I used in my shop, and just because I had nothing else, I said, well, I'm going to scrape this top down. I'm just going to just paint on some floor finish on my countertop, and that thing is so bomb-proof. It's perfect.
So Mike's saying use floor finish.
I guess,
and you can clean
go
it with
for
scrub and bubbles.
It's something.
That's right. With a Swiffer.
All right. But before we bore people, let's move on to
Too late.
Way too late for that.
This is slow going today.
About 100 episodes too late for that.
This question comes from Maxime Tanguay, and I hope I'm not butchering the name too
Probably
much.
Maxime.
Maxime?
Yeah.
Okay. He's looking for some joinery advice and says, I'm looking to build a Scandinavian-inspired TV cabinet, and I was wondering how to properly build the base, which will have round tapered legs set at an angle with an apron joining both front legs. And we chatted about this a little bit yesterday, and both Mike and Matt had some good takes on how to go about doing it.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that Mike and I both agree on is that this is essentially what you're wanting to do is the same type of joinery that you see in like a shaker candle stand, which has a round central column and then usually has 3 legs that join it. And Fine Woodworking has run several articles that show how to do that type of joinery on different tables. One of them I remember was Mario Rodriguez.
Yes.
And Chris Bexford probably
Most recently,
most recent on the shaker candle stand. And actually my dining table, which I was just mentioning, has that type of base. It has a turned column and 4 legs. And what you have to do is create a flat where the leg is going to join the column, or in your case, the leg, so that you don't have to do curved shoulders.
Right.
So you create a flat, and what I used was sliding tenon. So the leg got the male side of the tenon, and the column had the female side for each leg. And I cut it all by hand. I flattened it. I laid out where the flat needed to be, and I flattened it with a hand plane. Laid out the female part on there, cut that with a hand saw, and cleaned it out with a chisel and a router plane, and then cut the male side of the dovetail with a hand plane too. And because of the size of it, it wasn't hard, and I don't think it would be hard. You wouldn't need any specialized tools. To do that. We saw a picture of this thing that the guy wants to make, and I don't think you would need specialized tools for that. And I would lean to do that again. Mario's method used a router and I think a lathe and a carriage. Yeah. So that's probably what I would do. But that's
Well, that was a bigger piece, though. I mean, these legs are pretty narrow.
You could still do it.
yeah.
Well, you would have the one thing you would have to do for this, because they're kind of these maybe a foot long round legs, is you probably want to make some kind of jig up to hold that leg.
I think so.
Still, while you cut the dovetail. What is it? A dovetail?
The slot.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, this desk that I just finished up, it had splayed tapered legs. I did it a little bit differently because the legs attached to the cross members, not on the ends, but with a haunch or a bridle joint. But even there, I did all the joinery while my stock was still square. So that's another way to go about doing it is however you can separate out the shapy part from the joinery part, the better you're going to be. So whether you do everything while the stock is square and then turn it later, or to Matt's point, you turn it first, but then you reestablish flats as reference surfaces for the joint, that's a good way to sort of divide and conquer.
And maybe experiment. Just, before you get to the real thing, just experiment on some scraps.
Do a sample joint,
see how
figure
it
out what
works.
works. Yeah.
Definitely make up sample parts first for this and give it a try.
Yeah. All right, well, let's move on to our next question. This one is from Daniel Moorman, and he says, I do a lot of turning. Recently, a friend dropped off several terrific Juniperus virgiana, eastern red cedar logs. The color in the heartwood was magnificent, and the contrast with the white sapwood was really terrific. However, a few weeks after I turned one log, the red-purple turned brown, and the sapwood darkened as well. How can I preserve the color of wood? And I think the answer is you really can't.
Yeah. This is the...
put it in an airtight chamber where no light ever reaches.
Hermetically seal it.
Yeah, I mean, this comes up in a few different ways. Usually this question raises its head in terms of someone just made something out of, some tiger maple, and it's beautiful and white right after it's milled. They want to know how to keep maple really, really white. The answer is, it's going to do what you want to do. That freshly milled state is just a temporary state, oxidation, light. The wood is just going to go where it wants to go. The general rule of thumb is light woods get darker and dark woods get lighter. They bleach out. So, it's going to be what it's going to be. I really don't think there's a way you could maintain that color. And then conversely, a lot of times you'll build something in cherry and it starts out this sort of sickly salmon pink right when it's done, and especially if it's for a client and they expect this rich brick red cherry and there's this salmon pink piece, you just have to educate the people and just say, give it 6 months. It's going to darken. Don't stain it. Don't do anything. it's like, I think, staining cherry is one of those horrible missteps because it just takes on such a beautiful color on its own. So there's a case where you got to wait for it to do its job. And other times, it starts out looking really cool. And you just have to understand it's not the natural state of this board.
Yeah.
And it's going to move.
Yeah, I had made a little wall shelf for a friend of mine out of black locust. He had a whole pile of black locust, and he wanted me to see if he could use it at all. And I bandsawed some pieces from it and had a nice book match for the back panel. And but it was this really brilliant, like a mustard yellow, and it was really cool looking. And then I think it was like Mike said, it was a few months after it was finished, and it turned, it wasn't unattractive, but it lost completely that yellow tone, and it turned this really deep brownish tone. And it was just surprising to me. It was like my first experience with a real drastic color. I've built a lot of maple pieces, and they turn kind of that, I like the way it turns yellowish over time.
Yeah.
It's like honey colored.
Yeah. And so it was like a real drastic change for me. And I was like, wow, it's really crazy how much wood changes. And, I was up on a photo shoot with Garrett Hack one time, and he was showing me how his cherry wall boards had changed. And he had, I don't know if it was his jointer, he had a machine in front of his wall boards, and when he rearranged his shop, it was like a body outline of where the machine was. And it was just funny that, I don't know if he had a finish on, I don't know if it was oil or whatever, but it's just funny how wood reacts to just its natural surroundings.
Yeah.
Cherry is a funny wood, and I've used a lot of cherry that was clearly cut down and milled up recently, and I bought it at the lumber yard. And you're right, it has that salmon color. But I've also used cherry, which I know for a fact was very old. Like, for example, my mother-in-law gave me this table that she said, cut it up and use the wood. And I took one of the top planks, cleaned off all the stain from it using the joiner down in the shop and the planer.
Just running that finish right across the joint.
I'm kidding. I'm just messing with you, Mike. I didn't do that. I did it at your shop. Rachel let me in. Sorry. And that was that. Then I resawed that into veneer. Every single piece of that veneer that I cut was the rich, dark, oxidized color that you want out of cherry. And it's like, I don't know if that's just what cherry looked like 150 years ago, or if is it possible that the board somehow oxidized all the way through. And it's also like this box right here, which I made from some 12-quarter cherry that I bought from that guy that, Charlie, All
right.
And every piece of that stuff that I've cut up so far has been throughout the entire thickness and width of the board, that dark, rich color. And it's like, well, where does this cherry come from? And I want to buy some more because it's instantly that beautiful color. I mean, this all it has is shellac on it.
And it's already really dark.
It's already really dark. And it's, So I wonder if the rate at which the cherry grows now has an effect on its initial color?
There's definitely variation, and it seems like the lighter boards, they tend to have a more pronounced grain patterns to it, like the cathedrals tend to be more light dark.
Like they grew faster?
I don't know. Or in the stuff you're talking about, a lot of times the grain is almost seamless. It almost looks like a piece of mahogany.
Yes.
And that tends to be that darker, richer cherry.
Yeah. Well, I don't know the answer to that.
I don't know. We should talk to someone who does.
Yeah.
Good point. Well, let's move on to our final segment, and this time it really will be the all-time favorite tool of the week for this week.
All right. You want me to go first again?
Jeez, no. Go ahead, Matt.
Well, mine is this technique called the jam chuck. No, it's actually a tool related.
What's the timestamp on that, Ben?
It's actually another turning related thing. I did quite a bit of turning in the last week. Not only did I turn that little sugar box, I like a sugar box. That sounds funny. I also turned a little bowl one day, just really fast, a tiny little bowl, about the same size as the sugar box there. And because the sugar boxes turn more like a box, like a spindle, right? Because that's how you make a box on a lathe. You turn it like a spindle and you cut into the end grain. But bowls, you turn like it's faceplate turning, and you're cutting into the face grain. and so you can use a gouge there.
Okay.
So I pulled out my my bowl gouge, and I have to admit, when I first got a bowl gouge, I really didn't understand how to use it, and it would often catch, and I would have problems. And then I discovered what, at least for me, is the secret to making it work. And I hollowed out that little walnut bowl I made in like 10 minutes, if that. It was so fast and just like zip, 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 really fantastic. So bowl gouge is my all-time favorite tool of all time this week.
Maybe Ben can come up with a better sound effect for that.
You don't like that? That's something. There's great sound effects in woodworking, like bonk, 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 zip, zip, zip. But it maybe
That's a topic for another day.
but it's funny that there's woodwork. I know all these woodworkers, and each one of them has their unique signature woodworking sound that they do to
As they're talking about
a process. Yeah.
Huh.
Like Bob Van Dyke at Connecticut Valley goes bonk, 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 and Kelly Dutton, who used to work here, would go pss, pss, pss. That was his standard woodworking sound. And
It's also a great way to call your chickens.
And it's
Right.
just the noise that just says all you do is do this, pss, pss, and you're done.
Yes.
It's the noise that represents all work being done.
it's yada, yada, yada.
Yes. Yes.
All right, Mike, how about you?
I have a tool. This actually came about because I'm thinking about an article idea, and it's interesting that we're all three here talking about it because Matt edits the handwork department, and Tom he's the
I'm
big
something.
wig. So
So we're going to give approval or disapproval right now.
yeah, so here's my pitch. The inaugural handwork department article I wrote, and it was on the essential hand tools. I started out with 10, ended up with 12. I was just revisiting that, and I think it's a solid 12. I don't think I would change anything about that. But what I was thinking about was coming up with an article where it's sort of, okay, like beyond the basics. What's that next level before you get into something really specific like spoon carving or carving ball and claw feet or something? What's that next level category of hand tools that might fit there that you might want to start to pad out your collection a little bit? And one of the tools that would definitely fit in that second category for me is a really wide, short chisel. And
Yes.
the one I have there, it's probably maybe an inch and a half wide. I have a couple of them. The one I'm using now is a Japanese version of that, but really, really wide, really, really sharp. Never used it for any chopping or anything like that. It really becomes almost a substitute for like a little block plane. And I know, Matt, you have chisels that you use in very much a similar manner.
Yes. Yep.
And it's one of those tools that I pick up. I almost want to say maybe second behind a block plane in terms of how often I use this particular tool.
Yeah. I was using mine last night.
Were you?
Yep. I have one just like that. Short, fatty. It's a little butt chisel.
Yeah.
I've got one too.
And I've been using mine actually in doing my Kumiko. I used to have these little stop blocks to bevel the angles. I would use a block plane, but it was always sort of a pain in the butt. And I've been using a broad, flat, really, really sharp chisel just to shave the ends of that. So favorite tool of all time, and probably one of the definite contenders in a future article on the next level of preferred hand tools would be a broad, short, really sharp butt chisel.
We should
Chisel basics.
we should definitely do that article, Mike. That sounds fantastic.
Thanks, Matt.
Readers right in. Well, I have my favorite all-time tool of all time this week is my record block plane, my little blue devil. And I love this thing. I love it because I bought it on the cheap about, I guess, in 2003. And
How do you remember that? What were you doing in 2003 that you remember buying a blue block plane?
I just started.
That was the
as an
year he was
associate-
sober.
That was the beginning of the end. No, I had just actually jumped over from the copy desk to the editorial
Cool. Okay.
people, and I bought this tool used, and I think I got it for like $10. And just like with any, we all love our block planes, and I know some people dislike them, but it comes in so handy for all the things I'm doing. And on this base that I'm building, I used it so many times, and I just had freshly sharpened it before I got to work on it. And I just love, when I'm chamfering the edge, how that little swivel comes out of the
little
plane.
pigtail.
Yeah, it's just awesome.
Oh, that was good.
Yeah, that was a good
his.
sound, wasn't it?
That was his sound.
But even for champering the bottom of the feet, it's just so awesome to just reach for this nice sharp tool and just put it to work on end grain or long grain, and it works beautifully. And like I said, it's a bargain. And I know, people like their high-end planes, but this is a real solid tool, and it really works well, and it fits my hand perfectly. And I like the blue color.
All right.
So
the record Blue Devil.
the Blue Devil, baby. All right, let's start to wrap this puppy up. We often get some juicy comments from our audience, and I'd like to share a short stack that we got recently. Casey O writes, "This is the first time I've ever watched the Shop Talk podcast. You guys look terrible." Just like a woodworker should. Just like I do. I thought that was pretty funny. I don't know how to pronounce this, but
Cattail Clan.
Cattail Clan Tim writes, "Quite frankly, I'm sick of STL."
Well, stop listening.
Turn the dial. Dave Norman.
That's got to be a joke, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping. Yeah, it's hard to tell sarcasm, but he may not be. Let us know if you're being sarcastic, Tim. Dave Norman chimes in with this. In episode 100, the juxtaposition of a letter of complaint about Matt Kenny and a phone call from Ed Pernick, who wants to be Queen Amidala, seems mighty suspicious. Is it possible that Ed left Fine Woodworking for time to have a gender reassignment and has returned as Edwina Gabriela, an old woman with bandsaw problems who counts Matt's words?
Yeah,
Wow.
this is the problem with woodworking humor. There's no such thing.
There is.
Right.
Yeah, it's just not.
Yeah, the big premise, the problem with the premise there is Ed didn't need to have a surgery to write that letter, which I do believe Ed wrote it.
All right, and that's finally, we have a compliment from Dan Evanson who writes, "You guys are now more lucky with 2 bald men."
Actually, we have 3 bald men.
3?
You just can't see Mike's bald spot.
Who's not bald in this crowd? I take offense to that.
All right.
Baldine.
Okay, folks, that's all for this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you have any woodworking questions, send them as well as your comments to shoptalk@taunton.com. Please spread the word about Shop Talk Live to your woodworking friends and neighbors by any means necessary, including Twitter and Facebook. You can catch the podcast via iTunes. And while you're there, please give us the all-powerful 5-star rating. You can also stream the podcast on the web at www.shoptalklive.com or catch us on iHeartRadio. Thanks for listening and have fun in the shop.
Bonk, bonk, bonk. 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 Bonk, bonk, bonk.
And you're done.
Bonk, bonk, bonk. Bonk, bonk, bonk. Bonk, bonk, bonk. Bonk, bonk,
And you're
bonk.
done.
Bonk, bonk, bonk.
Chamfering the edge, how that
And
little
you're done.
swivel comes.
Bonk, bonk, bonk.
And you're done.
Bonk, bonk, bonk. Bonk, bonk, bonk. Bonk, bonk, bonk.
And you're done.
Bonk, bonk, bonk.
And you're done.
Like that short, fatty. It's a little butt chisel.